Hey John, it's BJ from the Arcane A-List. I enjoyed the 4E Cosmology episode. I agree that was one of the strong points of 4th edition.
Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries. I'm your host, John, and before the music there, we heard from BJ of the Arcane Alienist talking about how much he liked the cosmology, the world axis cosmology in 4th edition. As per my previous episode on the subject, I'm a pretty big fan of it too, but BJ's got a little bit more to say, so let's let him crack on with that.
I've continued to use it even in 5th edition and other games at times. I wish they had kind of kept that. If they were going to have a default cosmology for 5th edition, I kind of wish they stuck with that. They do describe it in the DM's guide as an alternative to the Great Wheel. Never been a fan of the Great Wheel. I think it's very convoluted and complex and only serves to help bring about more arguments and debates about alignment, because now it sort of makes alignment a real thing because of the cosmology, and the DM has to police everybody about whether they're playing their alignments correctly for certain classes. So I don't like getting into that. I think that, like you had said, because it's a little more nebulous and a little less well-defined, it's a little more freeform. I also thought it was kind of neat. You could almost see it as a medieval view of an actual physical galaxy, with we've got is the abyss, or is it a black hole? Is it a material plane, or is it just a planet? And the astral sea, is that an astral sea, or is that just how they experience space because they don't have another reference point? So I really enjoyed the 4E cosmology, and I'm glad to hear someone else there is a fan of it. So great episode. Keep it up.
Thanks very much for the call in, BJ. Glad you enjoyed the episode. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the 4th edition World Axis cosmology, as you've probably guessed. I hadn't considered, I've got to admit, the fact that it could be a sort of medieval and inverted commas sort of view of how space and cosmology actually works. That's really interesting. I think it's something I'd have to sort of sit down and have a think about at the start of the campaign, when I was sort of like pondering that stuff. But I could really see that being interesting if you wanted to do a slightly more sort of medieval led game. So thank you very much for that suggestion. And next up, we have a call from Randy, one of the dynamic duo behind the podcast Biggest Geekers. So go ahead, Randy.
Hey, John, this is Randy. Can't remember if I got my message through on inspiration on the Thieves, but I really appreciate the Thieves episode, but kind of calling for a different thing.
Sounds a little bit ominous. What's on your mind, dude?
Just wanted to let you know that you've inspired Joe and I to do kind of a monster series, not unlike you and Hannah. I think we're going to focus on purely D&D monsters too, and we don't mean to step on your toes, and not trying to do competitive thing here, just kind of thought it was pretty cool. So we're going to kind of rank the top 10 D&D monsters and have a few other things. Probably we're hoping for kind of 11 episodes out of this, but maybe not in a row. So anyway, that's the idea, and I hope it's cool. You guys take care. Keep up the good work. Bye.
Cheers, dude. That is absolutely cool. And in fact, myself and Hannah, since like I say, I'm recording this a bit after the messages were sent, myself and Hannah actually left the Biggest Geekers a voicemail message saying how much we love the idea and we were glad that we'd sort of inspired them. But like I say, the more the merrier as far as I'm concerned. It's one of the things I like about OSR gaming and D&D is like you've got a lot of different people all coming in with like different perspectives and ideas, and that results in ideas and things that I might not have considered, when I was looking at things. And in fact, I think me and Hannah are going to, in a sort of inspiration-ception, we're going to take a bit of inspiration from you guys, because we'd not considered like ranking our top 10 favourite monsters. But I think that's something like we might do now, do it like separately, like myself and Hannah, just to see like what differences there are in our sort of favourite monsters and what different types of monsters we go for. So I really can't wait to hear what you guys are going to put out. Thank you very much. We're really glad that we've inspired you for this, and we look forward to seeing what you put out in the future. And next up, we have a voicemail from Goblin's Henchman about point crawls.
Hi John, Goblin's Henchman here. Just listening to your latest episode, I heard Joe ring in, and he reminded me that I wanted to say something about point crawls. Yeah, I think point crawls are really valuable. I've experimented with them a little bit, in particular on my procedural adventure Carapace. And I did a play test of that recently, in fact 2, and I was feeling a bit pressured because I was doing it for people I didn't know. So I kind of used a kind of sort of almost like a VTT, well, just basically Word with some tokens. I just dragged the tokens around just so I could keep track of them. But I really found that kind of even that intrusion, because I normally do theatre of the mind, I found it really fixed things in a way that I didn't like, because there's only so much you can do with a 2D top-down representation that you can't do in your mind. And I found there was more heads-down play rather than heads-up play, people looking at the tokens, not thinking about, what's happening to them.
Yeah, I mean, thank you very much for that call, Goblin's Henchman. I've really been loving the point crawls recently, and I'm sort of slowly working out the best way of using them for our group in the Smoke and Snow OSE campaign that I'm running at the moment. And in fact, the most recent session we did as of time of recording, I pretty much had, they're in sort of like a mega dungeon, sort of underdarky sort of place at the minute. And I basically laid out the big map for that, and then I just had a single party token. We used it to represent generally where they were. There wasn't really much detail on the map, aside from showing sort of like the spaces and their relative size and position to each other, and the rest of it was done by description. There was a couple of little areas where we went onto a slightly more detailed map that I had done, but the vast majority of it, because we didn't want to be crawling around each 5-foot square on this huge mega dungeon, so we tracked it in a more sort of abstract point crawl style, and that seemed to work really well. It was all very simple because we're just using Owlbear Rodeo, which is a very simple VTT. We had a spreadsheet in Google Drive with all of the character sheets on, and we just used the dice roller in Owlbear Rodeo, and that was pretty much it. And the players all seemed to respond really well to that and seemed to quite enjoy it, rather than it being like a really long sort of slow slog through this massive mega dungeon. So it's definitely something I'm going to look towards using in the future. And I do think you're right, as I've said recently, that having too many bells and whistles can distract a little bit and become an end unto themselves. So thank you very much for the call. It's greatly appreciated. And next up, we've got a few calls from Jason of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. But first of all, he wants to say something about skill systems.
Hey, John, just want to say that I still recommend Scarlet Heroes and that skill system. I actually have Worlds Without Number. I've got the deluxe book from Kickstarter, the printed book, but I haven't opened it, so I don't know what's in it. I don't know if it's the game's same skill system or not. I like what the Pink Phantom proposed, though, because that way when your thief gets in and they have a 2 and 6 chance or 3 and 6 chance, now they have a 2 or 6 or 3 and 6 on 2 dice or maybe 3 dice. And I think that's interesting. Like, say, I don't know exactly the math numbers, but I think it is interesting and definitely worth exploring and maybe building into a small subsystem, like you say. So that was a great contribution.
Yeah, I think Pink Phantom's idea was really interesting. Although, like I say, I'm not really up with the maths myself. I have to sit down and sort of work it out, or let someone who's far better at maths than me work it out. As for Worlds Without Number, it's my understanding that it pretty much uses the same skill system as Stars Without Number. I have had a flick through it, but I'm not really good at retaining information on a quick flick through, so I really need to go through it again. And it's definitely a game I might look to run at some point in the future, which would entail me reading into it in more detail. But thank you very much for the call. However, before we go on with more of Jason's calls, that cheeky chappy Goblin's Henchman has nipped back in, where he wants to talk about the City book I was discussing in a previous episode.
Hi John, just Goblin's Henchman here. Just nothing particularly fantastic to say, but I've also got that McKidney's City book. I think I've got a second edition one. I think I bought it at the time because I was interested in maybe making a hex flower about exploring a city. And I thought, wow, there's a lot of stuff in here, but I think you're right. There's so much stuff that it's almost to the point where you wouldn't be able to use it on the fly very easily unless you're really familiar with it.
Yeah, much as I love the City book, Goblin's Henchman, I think you're absolutely right. I personally wouldn't be able to use it on the fly. I tend to use it between sessions, you know, when I'm like planning out new settlements and I'm firming up some of the details and stuff like that. I think there's a few tables I could pull from if I wanted a quick sort of like, oh, you know, what encounter have they had on the fly. But the actual sort of city planning stuff, I think I'd sort of mainly keep that for my between session prep.
And as for that mini Manual of the Plains, you know, the sort of tiny AD&D books, I actually bizarrely have that also. I think on G+, I remember that some guy came out and said he managed to collect the full set, including like the box set. There's like a box set for basic or something, and I had a quick look on eBay, and these things are, certainly when I looked back then, they were going for like 200, 300 quid, 800 quid, you know, crazy money. So, your Manual of the Plains may be worth some coin. I should probably look myself, but yeah, there you go. Bye.
Thanks very much for the heads up about that, Goblin Henchman. Yeah, I've got to admit, particularly with my sort of eyesight now, the mini sort of AD&D books they did aren't really of a great deal of practical use to me. I mean, I've only got that one because my wife bought it for me years ago, bless her, as a sort of like novelty item, and I later on went to acquire the full size sort of orange spine version. And yeah, it's a cool little novelty, but like you say, people are paying silly money for it. I expect it's mainly because there's probably not many of them survive because they're not exactly hard wearing, and there's that sort of novelty / nostalgia factor. And who knows, I might sort of pass mine on or sell it at some point in the future, but it's got a little bit of sentimental value to me because, like I say, my wife bought it for me, so I'll probably keep hold of it. And next up we have a couple of calls from Jason at Nerds RPG Varietycast again, and this time it's about meeples or using tokens in games.
Hey, John, Jason here. Just want to say, on your Meeple episode, yeah, I've used substitute counters for a long, long time. I don't play in war game tournaments or things like that, but I've, played war games of friends or board games of friends or, some like the Games Workshop board games and skirmish games. You have to put the miniatures together, and I'm lazy, so we'll just use other things, miniatures from other games or, coins or poker chips or whatever to represent the pieces. So I don't mind substituting things. I think it just is simple and easy and no big deal. So yeah, no, but definitely I would never consider having to buy all the miniatures for a role playing game. But I guess if you're going to a convention or something like that, you want it to look good. The other option, though, it's been a long time since I've gone somewhere I needed a lot of nice looking miniatures, convention or something. I'll either borrow the miniatures. I've done that before when I ran a game, a Modern Warfare skirmish game. I borrowed a bunch of miniatures from somebody to use at the convention. Or I'll print up either trifolds or bifolds on my own printer where you can print like front and back, and you'll have to put some research into finding the right pictures and all. But I did a Ghostbusters game where I printed, just got pictures offline and printed up my own foldies, paper folded figures. And that works fine too. It's a little extra work, but that looks pretty good. But just playing at home with friends, I'll just use poker chips and things like that. Make, what do you call them? Pogs. And do that, because that works just well. So, take care.
All great suggestions there, Jason. Thank you very much. Yeah, I've got to admit, I forgot to mention poker chips in my original episode, but I have used those before. Another thing I have used is like the pieces from drafts or checkers, and I've sort of printed out like little round like tokens with like an orc face and a goblin face and stuff like that, and then I've just like blue tacked them onto the checkers pieces, and that works equally well. Or as you say, you can get numerous different types and colours of poker chips which you can use to represent different things on the tabletop, and I think they work really well. I mean, I think poker chips might be a little bit big for the standard sort of like inch square grid, but I'm sure you can probably get smaller poker chips, or you can just sort of like not worry about it too much depending on what game you're running. But yeah, I think tokens can work really well, particularly if you've got limited storage space, you're having to transport a lot of stuff for a convention. And while miniatures do look cool at conventions, I mean, I've gone to a convention up in Glasgow and we laid out full like Dwarven Forge 3D scenery in a dungeon. We had all miniatures and all stuff like that. and it was really great, looked great on the tabletop, but it was a pain in the butt to transport, and it was an awful lot of effort to set up. Whereas if you want to do a quick game, you want something with a little bit more minimal fuss, then counters and tokens all the way as far as I'm concerned, if you even need to use physical representations. But tell me, Jason, what do you think about the concept of evil in D&D?
To be honest, I'm not really that bothered. Like in AD&D First Edition, some classes require you to be evil to be that class. And you may want those classes in the game, and that's okay, as long as the player is willing to be a team player and, like you say, work with a group. Then it's not that, not just screw everybody. It's not a big deal. I've played a lot of times in the 3-step alignment, I'll play chaotic characters, but they're not so much evil as selfish. And that doesn't, it's not in their self-interest to screw the party over, so they're not necessarily going to do that. But they may not, help that damsel in distress unless they think it's going to help them, right? So it just depends. But I think if you have mature players, it's not a problem. And if you have a player that abuses it, then that, is a pretty good sign you don't want that player in your game. So take care.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Jason. If you've got a good player, ironically, who's playing an evil character, but they still sort of keep in mind that it's a group game and everyone's there to enjoy it and they're not screwing over the party left, right and centre, then you can quite happily have a sort of slightly more self-serving / evil character in the group without it causing too many problems. And as you say, if you do get someone who is sort of taking it to ridiculous extremes, then if you've got a campaign world where there are consequences for actions, then there are going to be consequences for whatever shenanigans they're getting up to. With regards to the original sort of BX 3-step alignment, lawful, neutral, chaotic, we've got my friend Dave playing a chaotic thief, Quentin, in my Smoke and Snow Old School Essentials campaign at the moment, and he's more focused on sort of getting power for himself and using it to spread chaos, but he still works with the party. He's still a great asset to them while adventuring, and that's working really well so far, and we've had no problems with that. Not that I thought we would, because I've known Dave for a number of years. I know he can play these sort of characters who walk the tightrope between good and evil, and what they can get away with and what they can't get away with, and I know he's very good at that. So as you say, I think it all comes down to a sort of level of trust between the GM and the player who wants to play the evil character. But it really depends on your specific game, your group, and stuff like that. And finally, to round things off, we have another call from Jason, where he's talking about our recent zombie episode. Go ahead, Jason.
Hey, John, Jason here. I got sick of zombie movies maybe 20 years ago or so.
Yeah, I can certainly understand that, dude. There was a period of time where it seemed like a zombie movie was coming out every other week, and some of them weren't that great, to be perfectly honest, and they sort of, in my view, missed the mark about what makes zombies so terrifying. But so I can sort of definitely understand how your sort of enthusiasm for it might have waned, and that's why in the episode I was focusing more on sort of delving back into the sort of the origins of them in the original films and stuff like that, and the original fiction, rather than the profusion of sort of what I consider lesser media that came out in more modern times. Although there are still some good modern zombie movies that put an interesting twist on it. But yeah, like you say, you definitely have to curate your sort of research when it comes to things like this.
Zombies can be interesting. I wouldn't overuse them in a game, at least not Romero-style zombies. And there's definitely a difference between a zombie raised by magic and a Romero-style zombie, right? But if you're going to do the Romero-style, I'm also sick of funnels in DCC. I think a funnel in DCC is great, one-time thing. You're starting a long campaign, you want to start with a funnel, that's great. But I don't want to play a lot of funnels in DCC because you don't get to play with the cool bits and bobs of the character classes when you're playing the funnel. But a zombie game, a situation where zombie hordes are coming, is a great time to do DCC funnel because then you can have a lot of character death. So, I don't know, there's something to think about.
Yeah, it's interesting you mention funnels, Jason. So as I was saying in our previous voicemail episode, I've not really had a great deal of experience with Dungeon Crawl Classics, but it's another one on my list of potential games to run, and I've got the thick old book for it. And yeah, the funnel concept's something I'm not really that familiar with, but I see people sort of doing like one-shots of it, and I'm not sure if I'd like to play in a lot of them myself as like one-shots, but I can see how, as the first sort of bit of a long-running campaign, which is how the book seems to be selling it from what I've read, I could see how it could be interesting. And yeah, a sort of a zombie outbreak scenario where, you know, you're the survivors in a village that's been encircled by the undead hordes. I think that could be really cool, and it's something I might keep on the back burner for when and if I do get round to running a DCC game. So that's it for this episode. It just remains for me to thank my wonderful callers. It's very much appreciated. We love getting your voicemails. And if you'd like to leave us a message and perhaps be featured in a future episode like this, then you can do so in a few different ways. You can leave us a voicemail message using SpeakPipe or Anchor, link in the description down below, or you can send us an email to rddrpgpodcast@gmail.com. So until we see you again, take care, stay safe, and whatever you're playing, have fun.